Returning to the podcast is David Cain, the author of Infinite Dead, a daily guide to Grateful Dead concert performances, Volume 1, October. David, thanks so much for coming back on to talk about this book.
I like your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we had you on for your book on shows in July.
Yes.
And I remember at that time saying to you, we got to have you back on to do the October one. So here we go. I'm glad you're able to take some time out to talk about this one. Over 200 shows you cover in this book. 200. Yeah. Talk about some of the standout moments that you had the chance to get to in this book, like the return of some major songs that hadn't been played in a while, some notable acoustic shows. There's some memorable Halloween shows.
You're right. October was, kind of a big month for them. Generally, because they did 2,000 plus concerts in their career and spread them out, you're going to find every month has got some good things to listen to. January, though, is like, I would say, a thinner month. They had finally wised up and figured out that touring the Northeast and the Midwest in the middle of winter, right, is not a good thing to do. But October, it's kind of nice, right? All over the country. It's good weather, and I think they liked playing during the fall. And so October has quite a few. Yeah, I think certainly the acoustic electric combined kind of format, which happened in 1980 and began actually in September 25th. And they were doing this at that time at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. And they played a series of concerts where they would do an acoustic set and then two electric sets. And then I think they did this for a couple times in New Orleans and then up to Radio City, where they did this again for 9 nights, an acoustic set and two electrics. And so it started in September, but the bulk of it ran all the way through to October 31st in New York. And what was, remarkable for fans of the band was that they were playing acoustic as sets again, which they did for a brief time throughout most of 1970. And suddenly they decided, let's do it again. And a lot of fans really loved this acoustic music that they put out and even maybe started with the Grateful Dead there in 1970 when they were doing this. And so it was a wonderful surprise and very high expectations, and the band did a great job. It's not an easy thing to suddenly play acoustic
Sure.
if you're an electric band.
But if anybody could do it, it's the Dead. And we're,
Yes, extremely talented musicians and a lot of stamina. They did some incredible things over
and
the
if
years.
I'm not mistaken, I think some of those shows ended up as the live album.
Yeah, Dead Reckoning and
Yes.
then Dead Set. And I think those were the days where things still came out on vinyl first.
Yeah.
And so Dead Reckoning, I think it was a double album, and that was the acoustic stuff. And then they did another one like it, but it was the electric music. And these are selections from, various concerts along this acoustic electric run that they did. So yeah, I remember buying both.
And as you did on that book on July, you have some standout shows here, shows of note where you mark them with a rose. So let's get into some of the. I was looking through the book, so I figured maybe we'll go through the ones that are the biggest highlight moments of the book. But any that you want to add, feel free. But 3 October 1 shows of note here, and they are 1976 at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, 1977 at the Paramount Theater in Portland, Oregon, and the Boston Garden in 1994. That Indianapolis show, along with the Portland show, deserve more praise, you feel, you write in the book. Not ranked high among Dead fans, though. But why do you feel those shows are overlooked?
I think these 25 or so concerts designated with a rose, some of them are going to be pretty well known by people, like 10, 27, 79, Cape Cod, Saturday Night, the first of two, where they opened the second set with Dancing in the Street, Franklin's Tower. Fantastic improvisation, and became very well known among people who are collecting recordings and then listening to them. And a lot of people know about that concert now. So, and I believe fully they performed really well. So I designated it as sort of one of those that you definitely want to spend some time listening to. Others, like the Indianapolis concert from October 1st is just one of those where the performance was really strong. They performed whatever they were doing, uh, improvising well, hitting the notes decently, doing new things. It was just generally why I didn't understand more people weren't talking about this concert, just the strength of the performance. It wasn't that they played a tune for the first time in 10 years. It was just like, this is a really great Grateful Dead performance. Um, the next one, the Portland show, one thing is the music never stopped. It's a particularly fine performance of that song, and I even refer readers to a similarly strong performance of it from 2378. Um, the one in 1978 eventually came out as a formal release, and so that got to be more widely known. But here's another one on this date, October 1st, and it's not as widely known. So if you like 2378, you should definitely listen to this version of Music Never Stopped. And I think that's why that one made one of the top 25.
Yeah, specifically at 6 minutes 20 seconds in, you say he begins his furious flurry of chords, four runs worth.
Yeah, so typically the way Music Never Stopped would go, they do the first half of the song and then, okay, it's time to hit Garcia's main solo. And he would work the solo and then either just end it or he would switch from these individual notes to doing chords and then hitting them. His hand would look like a hummingbird or a bumblebee or something moving that quickly through the chords. And he would do that, kind of trilling them and go through that once, twice, three times, and then they would end it. But in this occasion, he just keeps going and going and going, and then doesn't end the song, goes back to continuing to solo. And that's unique. That did not happen often on that song. And so, again, it's something, if you like Music Never Stopped, that's something you should definitely listen to.
October 3rd, moved to the 3rd of October, 1987 at the Shoreline Amphitheater. Keyboardist Brent Midland. He shines. You say he shines everywhere. Talk about his performance that night. This is October 3rd, 1987, Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View, California.
1987 and on, my feeling listening to Brent's part of the music is that he was really becoming on even standing, even keel with the rest of the players, right? When he started in 79, he was like the new keyboard player, and we need a keyboard player. So here he is. And then by the fall, everybody understood that this guy could really jam and improvise and in a meaningful way. But as you go forward from there, he'd do his own tunes and they weren't really catching on, in a big way with fans. He'd do one, he'd do another, and he'd do a cover tune. But from 87 forward, 88, 89, 90, he was really becoming, I think, on par with the rest of the players. And in this review of this concert, I'm hinting at that, which is, he's contributing just wonderfully improvised breaks. They give him a break and he'd do great things on it, or he would do harmony vocals on a song. And then, of course, occasionally he'd have his own song that he'd lead sing on, or he would lead sing on a cover, join Lesh on Give Me Some Lovin' or something like that. And so I think he was beginning to really gain some confidence and some comfort and come into his own. And you can really hear this by 89 and 90,
He's
full-fledged member of the band for sure.
great addition to the band in the studio as well, as we would find out on In the Dark and Built to Last. The songs that he writes and sings on are great. It's kind of a triple threat, I guess, right? The vocals, he can write music, and then obviously his work on the keyboards. Yeah, it's too bad that he passed so young, late 30s, I
Yeah.
think.
Um, you could argue he was really the strongest keyboard player that they ever had, not just in terms of longevity, the length of time that he was with the band, but the quality of his improvisation, quality of his singing. Keith Godchow didn't sing too much. You know, Brent sang quite a bit and forcefully. And so, yeah, it turned out to be a fantastic addition. And for me, the big surprise and the big win was his ability to improvise melodically, which you hear a lot in the fall of 79 for sure. That's the Cape Cod concerts, both nights, and others on that tour.
And you have some UK shows in the book. UK shows they performed in the month of October. One is October 4th, 1981, at the Rainbow Theatre in London. You write, quote, dynamic from the get-go. Bob Weir is in rare form before the show starts. He took a pool about a movie. I wonder if I don't think it's in the book. I don't know if you remember what movie was he addressing the audience on this one? Do you remember?
I don't recall, but uh, this was something Weir would do occasionally, take a poll of the audience. There was an Indianapolis 1979 show. It was in December, I think, where he did this. He said, "I want to take a poll. How many of you are from right around here?" And then he said, and a certain number of hands went up and cheers. How many of you are from, 20 miles? And how many of you came from more than 100 miles away? And the crowd went crazy. And so occasionally, yeah, Weir would do this kind of thing, take a survey, a poll. Sometimes he would share results of a World Series game. He and some of the other guys in the band were baseball fans, and once in a blue moon, Weir would share a score of a game.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's got a great sense of humor. I saw his solo show a couple of years ago, and he was funny that night in between songs. He was
yeah.
some nights I think he just goes from one song to the other, but some nights he may feel like he's a little more talkative. I don't know. You could speak to that more than me. I'm not sure, but he seems like he's got a great sense of humor.
There was a period, say 1970, and it might have been because the acoustic sets where things are quiet. You could really hear the audience in between those numbers and even during. And there was a lot of back and forth between all the band members at one time or not. Even Garcia, who was famously quiet and wouldn't say a word later on in 1970, he talks quite a bit. And of course, Lesh did too, and Weir also. They were all having Pigpen, and it's small, right? They were in small theaters. They could hear people, hear what they were saying, and eventually everybody kind of decided, not to say anything anymore. Garcia would famously say nothing. Lesh would say nothing. But Weir became the guy who would say, we're going to take a short break.
Yeah,
Everybody hang loose. We'll see you in a few minutes. That was his role, to make sure everybody knew that set one was over. But it was always him, never the other guys.
yeah.
So
What's the show? There's a May of '77 or '78 show where the crowd is getting too close to the stage. Everybody's starting to get crushed, and you hear Bob say, just back up a little bit, back up. Yeah,
I
yeah,
had forgotten that that also had happened because I reviewed the book a little bit before we decided to talk here. And the October 31, 1979 concert that I was at Nassau Coliseum, there were crowd issues like that, and I'd forgotten. But it was saying, and I quoted some of what Weir was saying about asking the crowd to step back. And of course, this happened quite a bit over the years, depending on the venue. And it was really uncomfortable for the band. But the Dead had all kinds of recurring issues with this sort of thing over the years, depending on the venue. But that was one that gets mentioned in this book. And then you move forward in time and it continues to happen. And it's very upsetting for the band. You can imagine, right, to be on stage and see people being, crushed. I was at another show in May of 79, same thing, where I wanted to get up front, see the band, right? Who doesn't want to be in the
yeah,
first row? General admission. And you start to get up there and it's like, this is not a good thing,
yeah.
And I ended up just backing out. It's like, this is too much.
Interesting set list. The band performed on October 9, 1982. This is in Palo Alto, California, at the Stanford University Frost Amphitheater. 5 years before they appeared on record, we hear Throwing Stones and Touch of Grey from the In the Dark album. They
Yeah.
opened set two. They played Morning Dew, and you write, quote, Morning Dew is a killer. Wear a helmet for the inside break. What stands out to you about that performance of Morning Dew from that night?
Um, I was just thinking about the other Morning Dew in October that I was thinking about from 1974 at Winterland. You know, if we talk about that run of shows, that Morning Dew on the 18th October was just profoundly moving. This one was more rocked out, if I remember correctly. 82 Palo Alto, just very energetic. And, it was a signature song for them. And oftentimes, they did some incredible things with Morning Dew as a side. It was an inspiring set of chords or something, right? Where it tended to bring out the best in them. And it would happen over many different years. 72 in Europe. There's a great one that made the album in 74 in Louisville. This one in 74 and Winterland. And this one here, just recurring that they could continue to do some of their best music making on this particular song. And the Touch of Gray, I really liked the soloing that Garcia did. It wasn't the easiest song, I think, to solo on and say something melodic. And in this particular performance, he did. But yeah, I don't think it's widely known that they were playing this thing for a long time, Touch of Gray, before it became actually a top 10 hit in 1987.
Yeah, only the dead can have that type of thing. Usually maybe it's a year before while a band's on tour and then it shows up on a record, but 5 years before it's really cool. And like I said, there's the other track there, which was Throwing Stones. October 9, 1983, the Dead played the Greensboro Coliseum, Greensboro, North Carolina, a Sunday gig. You end with, quote, underrated, a fine night for the other man in black. Show us the SBD, in all caps, our kingdom for a matrix. All right, can you explain this statement? SBD, I'm assuming, is a reference to soundboard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The other man in black is, of course, Garcia, because he always wore black. And
Okay.
the original man in black was Johnny Cash. So yeah, recordings come in generally two types: an audience recording, where somebody walked in and held up the mic and recorded that way, and then soundboards, which go through the band's, mixer unit, also in the middle of the floor typically. And so the soundboard feed often sounds like a studio recording because it's directly off of the stage typically. The audience, you're hearing what it was like when you were a fan standing right next to the person with the microphone. And it's tough to get a take on a concert, what it sounded like when you have two very different kinds of recordings, right? You can listen to the audience recording and think one thing, listen to the soundboard, it's a completely different experience. It's almost like a studio recording in some respects. Some of these fantastic engineers, taping people, were able to marry the two of them in what became known as a matrix recording. And so
Oh, okay.
they combine the audience recording with the soundboard recording. And so you get a lot of the pristine quality of a soundboard, but with a lot of the audience sound, the cheers
Yeah.
and you get both. And so for me, over time, if you listen to lots of recordings of the Dead on archive.org, the Matrix recording tends to be my go-to because it blends both of them
Sure. Yeah.
and still feels like a concert recording, like you were there.
So that's where our kingdom for a matrix, that statement comes from.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, because to me, a lot of people feel differently. They love the purity of the soundboard, the clarity. When you're listening to a soundboard recording, you can typically hear everybody very distinctly. So if you really want to hear Lesh's bass lines, you probably want to hear the soundboard because in a audience recording, you're not going to hear him. He's going to be very deep in the mix. Garcia came out lucky. He was always up in the mix, which I think was a decision of the recording engineers, no matter what. So even on an audience recording, you're going to hear that signature lead sound. But hearing what Weir is doing with his chords, Lesh is doing with the bass notes, if you really want to make sure to hear all of that, you need the soundboard to really make that come alive for you.
Yeah, the soundboard is interesting because it always sounded like they were playing in front of like a handful of people because it's any audience that you're hearing is just going to be picked up through the mic of the guys on stage. That's it. So you may hear a few people here and there, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's
you
it's a much different
typically you'll
experience.
hear nobody.
Right.
and it really sounds like they're in the studio. And for me, it also loses a lot of the excitement of what you felt like in a concert. So if I'm writing a book about a concert recording, well, what is the concert recording? Is it the soundboard? Not really, because
Right.
nobody heard that. Nobody, except the guys on stage. Maybe that's what it sounded like to them a little bit. But even they heard the crowd and were inspired by the crowd. And so a lot of me leans towards the audience recording, even if it's not as crisp and clear. But the Matrix has been a godsend, and so as time goes forward, more and more and more of these Matrix recordings are being made by these people who are taking the time to do it. And they will post it on archive. And now you can hear it for the first time in a brand new way.
Now let's get to the return of a few classic Dead songs that hadn't been played in a while. October 9th, 1989, at the Hampton Coliseum in Hampton, Virginia. You lead this entry with, quote, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus." All right, talk about those two songs, why fans universally would agree that this was the best show of 1989.
I don't know about two. Dark Star, certainly, right?
Yep.
The
And
revival of that.
Addicts of My Life.
Okay.
That was the other one. But the Dark Star was the big, that was the big one, because that was like the first time in how many years?
I think 5 years,
5 years.
7/13/84, the Greek theater, they decided, Lesh came out and said, we're going to do something one time only. It was a Friday night at the Greek, full moon, and they did Dark Star in 84. And then it's like, that's it, no more Dark Star until 89. And so this is a big deal. If you're going to pick one song that's a signature song for the Dead, it would probably be this, even though, it wasn't a top 10 hit or anything. And so here they are playing it. And so, dream come true for most of the audience.
The Dead shows at the Warfield Theater are legendary. October 10th, 1980. You lead with, quote, "12th off 15 on this stand, heaven." What about this specific night that stands out? What made this night so special?
So I was looking over it to remind myself, and maybe it was the around and around that goes into Promised Land. They would often 77 end with a couple Chuck Berry tunes, or at least one. They'd end with Around and Around, or typically would do it straight into Johnny Be Good. Promised Land, which was the third Chuck Berry tune that was a regular in the repertoire, Promised Land was usually reserved for opening set one or closing set one most times. And so this was kind of unique to end the concert in this way. And I think, if I remember correctly, Garcia starts to play Johnny Be Good, and I think Weir waves them off, and they end up going into Promised Land, which is another kind of Grateful Dead thing that would happen. They wouldn't exactly have total agreement before they would launch the tune. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
And
here it is.
end up,
The concert has an all Chuck Berry close. When they end Around and Around, Garcia breaks into the usual Johnny Be Good intro, but it becomes the launch for Promised Land. The only time they played it to end set two. It was also the tail end of the double encore for 12/11/79. It's a barn burner.
yeah, this was another song or group of songs that would often bring out the best in them. They loved Chuck Berry. And they had at least one Chuck Berry tune in the repertoire, I don't know, going back to at least 71. It made the Skull and Roses album. Johnny Be Good is on there. And then the Steal Your Face album has Around and Around. And I think Promised Land, I think both of them are on there. And they kept those three in the repertoire regularly. I'm big fans of Chuck Berry, and it's fun. And I think they loved it. They loved doing it.
Do you know what Chuck Berry's response was to that? Did he know the guys? Did he get to know them well?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I don't know, and I'm not, you know, sure it actually ever happened, right? I don't think they really crossed paths. I actually met Chuck at a book signing. He wrote a book, his autobiography,
Yeah.
and I was in LA at the time, and he was doing a book signing, and I thought, God, I really should leave work early to go, get his book and say hello, but I'm it's like you can't leave work at like 4 o'clock. But I did. A colleague encouraged me to get the hell out of the office.
Yeah.
I got in my car, I drove across town in LA and got in line and walked up and wow, Chuck Berry right there. And his eyes literally twinkled. I mean, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
I was looking straight at him and there was something in his eyes that were very special. And what can I say? Thanks, Chuck. Right. I mean,
Right.
wow.
What year would that have been? When did his book come out?
For his autobiography, this was, I can tell you, just give me a moment. I'm thinking I was 86 to 88, somewhere in there, where this particular company I was working at, and I left and I went and it's a great book. And there was a documentary, of course, right, about Chuck.
Well, that's the famous one with Keith Richards and
Yeah,
Chuck getting into a heated argument. Yeah.
yeah.
David Cain, the author of Infinite Dead, a daily guide to Grateful Dead concert performances, Volume 1, October, which we're talking about today. Volume 2 is also available. That covers the shows in June. I think I said July, but those are,
No, July.
it's July. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. The Grateful Dead in the Big City, New York, Madison Square Garden, October 11th, 1983, marks the return of St. Stephen. Hadn't been played since 1979, but there's a brand new jam that emerges out of thin air. This comes as they move out of I Need a Miracle and into Bertha. You write here, quote, Bertha ends, and they invent a brand new jam out of thin air. Listen for Phil Lesh's high notes, among other things. How often would this kind of thing happen where the Dead would just a new jam comes out of nowhere?
That's why we all went.
Yeah.
That was
Pretty much every night?
no,
No.
no, not every night. And that's probably why it was special. First of all, as a musician, you can't do these kinds of miracles every night.
That's what I figured.
It's really difficult it's how you feel, it's what inspires you. It's, if you're in the groove. Garcia talked about it. He would drink a little of this and do a little of this, and he'd have a great night. And then he would try to do the same darn thing the same way, and it didn't happen. And there's no formula, but as a band, they could do this quite a bit, during a tour, year to year. They could conjure up this kind of very compelling improvisations. The spirit would move them and they could do it. But, you could come back the next night and it's just kind of more normal, right? They go through the tunes and nothing spectacular. But that's what makes something like this very special because it happened. Uh, and now it could have been because they were bringing this song out of the treasure chest, right? They hadn't played it in a long time. Sometimes that can be a source of inspiration to take an old song and bring it out and perform it, and it lends itself to new ideas. And so something brand new happens potentially. Other times it could be a train wreck. They forget how certain parts go, maybe. They would do a certain amount of rehearsal before a tour began, right? But then, who knows which night they pull it out and hopefully it works. They didn't care, right? They weren't afraid of mistakes. And so,
Which is why people would get tickets on multiple nights, back to back to back nights, if they were in one venue, because each night something different could happen. Set list could be different, or like you say, you could find that magic happens that night and they break into a jam.
I saw a bunch of concerts in 1979, and it took a while before I really found something that would make that hit list of like, this is special. It took a while, concert to concert to concert. And so, for me, that was the Cape Cod concerts in October of 79, where it's like, wow, listen to these guys. It's like, finally, I'm there and some new stuff is being created right in front of me. Fabulous. But it did not happen all the time.
You went to two of them, right? October 27 and 28 of
Yeah,
79.
I went to both.
Yeah.
It was on Cape Cod. It was a bit of a drive from where we were in the Boston area. We found somewhere to sleep on Saturday night and, did the Sunday show as well. And they were both great, just two wonderful performances. And I don't quite know why these two were so great because the Cape Cod Coliseum wasn't a particularly special building. You know, it was kind of a place where you play hockey or something. And it wasn't beautiful. It wasn't Red Rocks. It wasn't the Greek Theater. It was just a place to play. And but I don't know, they found some inspiration. Maybe it was the crowd. I'm not quite sure.
Maybe they're not sure either.
Right.
They never know. Like you said, like even Jerry said, it's just something happens when it wants to happen. You know, it's they're going to have a great show. A show
Yeah.
that took place about 30 minutes away from me, which is Hartford. That's October 14th, 1983 at the Hartford Civic Center. The first of two nights, a great performance, underrated that you note. You also say that the Space Jam has some Close Encounters Jaws style tones. That's cool. Now this is kind of an aside, but maybe I don't know. According to the book Real Gags by Bill Givens, Jerry is in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Do you know this story? Have you heard about this?
I don't think so. In the movie?
He's supposedly in there. He's an extra during the scenes that take place in India. And I have played it time and
Interesting.
time again, and I cannot see him. Some people said he's one of the people that's like they have like the sound equipment and they get the headphones on and they're looking to pick up on any sounds that they might hear in the area. Some people say he's in a crowd shot. I was hoping maybe you knew.
I
The
do
dead
not,
expert.
but now that you've told me, you know, I'd like to see the movie on demand and then
Right.
hit pause as much as I have to see if I can find Garcia in that crowd. That would be funny.
I searched online. I was looking for people maybe they put like a frozen still shot of him. I can't pick up on him, but apparently he was there while they were filming. So
Interesting.
there's
Well,
there's the assignment for dead fans. Send it our way if you got
so
it.
the quintessential, you know, rendition of the Close Encounters theme by the band and Garcia doing it on his lead guitar was 12278, Eugene, Oregon. And who knows why that particular date, but it was in the second set coming out of space, and space is generally all kinds of sounds and who knows what. And this particular instrument, you know, he was going into this very low register sound and had his effects on. And clearly he had seen the movie within a recent kind of time and it had an impact on him. And the five tones, you know, came out clearly out of his guitar.
So cool.
And you could only imagine the effect this had on the crowd at Eugene, you know, indoors at the MacArthur Court, the old basketball court at the university. I went in there. I saw the dead at Eugene in 90 and went into MacArthur Court. It was still was there and all wooden, just like completely wooden old basketball court. And that's where they played. And so you can imagine if you're in that place hearing Close Encounters coming out of a Dead concert. Wow.
That is cool.
Oh, yeah. And he continued to do this once in a while. And in another book that I've written but haven't published, I've actually, you know, kind of got all of them lined up, all the different concerts where he did some or all of this Close Encounters theme, but he would continue to do it occasionally in the space segment of the concerts. And he did something like it here at Hartford in 83, although I must have thought some of what he was doing sounded like the Jaws theme from that movie. And of course, you know, like you said, it doesn't happen every night, right? And so it really stood out about this particular performance. The next year, also Hartford, 84, you know, was another good concert and kind of stood out for a very long first set, if I remember correctly, like 11 tunes, where they would usually do maybe eight. And then before drums in the second set, six tunes, where they would usually do four, maybe five. And the thing is, most people looking into what shows to listen to would see Hartford and would not go forward. It was not Madison Square Garden, it's not the Greek, it's not Red Rocks,
Right.
it's, you know,
It really
and
doesn't
yet,
matter. The venue doesn't matter. It's yeah, it's just a random thing.
they just,
That's what made it so beautiful. That going to a dead show.
you could
Or
see them at Hartford and maybe see one of the best performances of the year. And so,
yeah,
like you said, it paid to keep going. And yeah, it's kind of funny, Hartford, and these are overlooked. And so that was a reason that I wanted to make sure that people, took a look at these concerts, right? Consider it. If you've passed over these seemingly benign concerts at Hartford these 2 years, take a look. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, or go back and re-listen. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are the return of three major songs to the band set list that happen in the month of October. They're all covered in this book. Dark Star, we talked about. That's October 9 of 89, Hampton, Virginia. But there's also St. Stephen, October 11th, 1983 at Madison Square Garden, and Turn on Your Love Light, October 16th, 1981 in Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite of the three moments or
Favorite of the three. I would say the Love Light, just because when I was beginning to listen to the Dead, I was learning on a lot of 1970 and 1971 material. And Love Light at the time was their show closer, right? 1970, 71, more 69 and 70. Love Light, Pigpen singing it, and them taking it, to the roof, really raising the roofs, getting the crowd dancing, sending everybody home all pumped up. And of course, I was listening to the Live Dead 1969 album, which was Dark Star, St. Stephen, The 11, Turn on Your Love Light were the main songs on there. Listening to it every single night. And then I was hearing bootlegs from the 1970, Love Light, Pigpen. And so it had a big influence on me. And so you fast forward to say 79, I'm going to concerts, and suddenly in 81, here comes Turn on Your Love Light. Yeah, a big impact and it good memories. Even though I didn't get to see Pigpen in 1970, I was only whatever, 10, 11 years old. But that was kind of special. But they didn't quite work it back in yet, right? Later they did, and Weir began to do Love Light more regularly, which was nice. Um,
we did talk about briefly the Winterland shows in San Francisco, October 18, 1974. The band played the third of 5 nights there. And that's, I think, what you say is the best performance of Morning Dew.
one of the best.
Okay. Yeah. You say it may bring tears. This is also before
Yeah.
the band went on a hiatus. They only played
Yes.
maybe a handful of shows, I think, the next year.
Yes, exactly right. So they did five October 1974 concerts at Winterland. This middle night, the 18th, who knows how it happened, but a profound Morning Dew. It was in this little sort of in between set where they started doing a jam and then Dark Star and then Morning Dew, if I remember correctly. Wonderful. But yeah, they had planned to kind of say to the people, this is it, right? Everybody kind of knew that they were going to go on hiatus, whatever that meant. And they did.
What
They
was the
ended
reason
up,
for the hiatus? Jerry was doing more solo work. Did he have a
uh,
solo album at the time?
I don't think so. No, I'm picturing in my head, right? There were three solo albums that I can bring to mind, but no, I don't think that was it. I think, and I've, read the biography by Blair Jackson of Garcia and other things. And so my recollection is they just felt like they'd had enough for a
Right.
while,
Needed a break.
right? Yeah, exactly, which isn't strange, right? And I think, frankly, in hindsight, they should have taken another break at other points. It would have helped them, and particularly would have helped Garcia if they could have all just said, let's take a break. But by then, it was harder because you had this financial engine going, right?
Sure.
Even this one was a challenge financially because they didn't tend to make their money from records. They made it from performances. And so this was a difficult thing to suddenly in 1975 not making any money from performances anymore. But I think they felt we need a break, right? And let's just do it. And we don't know how long it'll be. Let's just, we're going to wing it, which they did with lots of things, winging it. And I thought, this is first impression. They're going to take a break and we'll see what happens. So yeah, these ended up being the last concerts for quite some time. They played March of 75. They played a concert in June of 75. They played a fantastic concert August 13th of 75. And then another one, I think, was September of 75. And then again, you get back to the hiatus and you don't get them playing regularly until much deeper into 76.
Yeah, they worked on Blues for Allah during that period.
Right.
That came out September of 75. But knowing Jerry back in those days, he was always playing. So my guess is it'd be interesting to see. I bet you he was doing a bunch of stuff on his own during that period.
Well, he was always like a Dead tour would end, and he could be in the Garcia band a couple days later.
Yeah, he was constantly playing,
Yes,
which is also why I think he just continued to get better and better, and the experimentation and the different tones that he was working with and all that was because he was just always performing.
he loved to play. I think he discovered that you get your chops up to a certain level if you're performing all the time and even practicing. If you practice 6 hours a day, you get your capabilities up to a certain level. If you stop, you degrade. If you take a week off and you go back, you're not as sharp as where you were there. And I think he liked to be at his best. And I just think he just loved to play. There are people in certain professions, you know, for whom you're either playing or you're waiting to play. That's life. Life consists of performing or waiting until your and that's all there is. And it's this way for race car drivers and maybe football quarterbacks. They live for Sunday, right?
Right.
And I think he really lived to play. He just loved to play.
Which is still mind blowing that the coma in '86, he had to relearn how to play, and I
Yeah.
mean that was just crazy. But he bounced back so quickly.
Yeah.
Fall of '81, the band was on a European tour, and they played at the Sports Palace in Barcelona, Spain, on October 19th. And you read about how fast Jerry's fingers were at that show. I don't hear that talked about much when you hear about Jerry Garcia. Talk about his guitar work during that show and why this is a great example of his speed on guitar.
Yeah, I can't call that to mind, that particular concert. There are other examples where he's kind of like a speed demon. January of 79, they do Dancing in the Streets, and he just keeps playing. And it becomes him and one or both of the drummers. And it's just a workout. And he is going as fast as possible. And he could be very fast. He covered the waterfront, right? He could do these slow, beautiful ballads, but he could also be extremely fast on the guitar. And, I'm not saying John McLaughlin or some of these others, right, who are known for that. And I don't think he was going for that. But there were times where, wow, just blinding fast and in a way that was still articulate and you could still hear the notes. And sometimes you couldn't. And he wanted that kind of finger painting effect, I think.
Right, right. Just another aspect of his guitar style.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say here, sounds like they put everything they've got into this performance. Garcia plays all night with an endless supply of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was like that. Just another example of a great night. And I think this was part of what I was trying to do in writing these books is make sure that I point out for the reader where the great stuff is and that they don't miss it. And they don't leave it up to the band to put out an official release to be their only guide, right? Because there's a different calculus when you're putting out something for public consumption. Like the recording has to be perfect, right? If there are mistakes, they're not going to put it out. And this performance you're talking about may very well have some mistakes, vocally or here or there, whatever, imperfect, but it's worth listening to for the great stuff. And it may never see the light of day as a official release. It may not. They can do some magic behind the scenes, right? But I think this was my chief task. The number one thing I wanted to do for people was, to point out the great stuff and make sure that they had a chance not to miss it.
Here's an example of Jerry and how often he played. This is going back to that Barcelona show. This is what you lead with: their third country in 4 days and the final gig of the European tour with 6 weeks off ahead. And then in parentheses, though Garcia will start a Jerry Garcia band tour within a week. He's right back at it with his own band.
And he kept doing that, even like 1987, he had come out of the coma, right? And he couldn't wait. And so they had a full touring schedule in 87. But if you look, he went off and did so many concerts on his own. I think 87, he might have played more concerts that year as a guitar player than any other. It was crazy
Well,
how much,
he said
how
in
much.
an interview at that point after the coma, he felt like, I'm not wasting any more time. I'm going to get as much in as I can while I'm here. I think
It was a
that's,
great year. I mean,
yeah,
he had a lot of energy and it physically he was different. If you watch videos of him in 87 with the band, his body was turned towards Weir and Lesh finally. He
yeah,
was looking at them and making a point of looking at them and being in eye contact and having that onstage communication. If you go back to 82, 83, 84, and you look at a random video, he's looking straight down
right.
and even see Weir and Lech off to the side of the stage. And sometimes they're both kind of looking at him, wondering, does he really know that we're huddled here together? Is he really aware that we're like 25 yards apart on stage here? And he may
Yeah.
not have, right? It just took all his concentration, to keep it together kind of physically and whatever. But in 87, brand new ball game, and it really harkens back to the old days where they really were together in a physical kind of a way and clearly wanting to be communicating that way with each other.
One more on Pigpen, and that's his show at the Greek Theater, Berkeley, California, or the Dead Show at the Greek Theater, Berkeley, California, 1968.
Oh
And
my,
this is where, he's got some nice work on the 11. And the band is really in sync on this one. I'm trying to remember I don't have the exact October date here, but I can find it. But so he had some moments throughout, which is good to see Pigpen getting a few moments throughout this book, because his time, not only in the Dead, but just on this earth, was way too short. So it was always cool to read a Pigpen entry in the book. October 20th, 1968, University of California, Greek Theater.
Pigpen, yeah, very important to me. Loved his music. And one of the nice things about this book, like I've been asked, why didn't you just do 1979 Grateful Dead or 1984 Grateful Dead? Why do this crazy thing with the month of October? And one of the reasons I did it is because it forces me and the reader to live the entire spectrum of Grateful Dead from 66 through 95. And so a fan coming late to the band who would not have to be confronted with Pigpen, he will be confronted with Pigpen in the book, right? Because I've got stuff from 66 and 67 and 68 in there. And my hope is that somebody who, is filled with late 80s, early 90s Grateful Dead might see that and want to explore it, right? And I think if you're a fan of the band, you should maybe take a look at what Pigpen did, the kinds of things he played and what his music was all about. And when you have it on the same page, you raise the odds that Pigpen might get a new fan, right? And also vice versa. I was certainly somebody who wasn't very excited to spend a lot of time on 1994 or 1995, the last 2 years. But doing this book in this way forced me to spend a lot of time listening to that material and coming to terms with it. And so,
Well, I remember you said last time that there are some moments in those 94, 95 shows.
yes.
Yeah, but it's still worth going back and listening, because there were times
Yes.
when Jerry was on.
Yeah. Pigpen was fantastic. Their things that along the path when I was doing this book, it's a man's world. James Brown, Pigpen did that. When I learned this, it's like, really? Because in all my bootleg listening days, right, I had not heard that. And one of the beautiful things about archive.org, all the concerts are there. And you can find these things like, wow, my God, they did a James Brown tune and Pigpen did this. That's fantastic. You got to listen to this. They did at least one version of You Don't Love Me, an Allman Brothers song,
Wow.
before the Allmans did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know Hard to Handle was one.
Another great R&B tune. Now
Yeah.
that got really worked into the repertoire and they did it a bunch of times, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't, the James Brown thing was in a sense a one-off or a two-off or something. But yeah, Pigpen did some fantastic things. And then speaking about the acoustic stuff where we started, he would do some wonderful things in those 1970 shows. They would actually spotlight him. He would do Katie May. Or She's Mine. That was another thing. I'd heard Katie May because it was on the Bear's Choice album. And but then I remember discovering this song called She's Mine, which was another Pigpen kind of solo acoustic thing that he did, which was great. And yeah, if you haven't heard Pigpen solo acoustic, I highly recommend it. Fantastic.
And we can't forget Keith Godshaw. I wanted to make sure we note at least one of the shows that he's in where he's a highlight, and that would be October 21st of 71. I think this is his second show overall with the band. This is in Chicago at the Auditorium Theater. Yeah, only his second outing, but he shines everywhere.
Yeah, he was. Now, people may not know this because time has passed and maybe their memories of Keith is back in 78, right? And early 79, where he was kind of on his way out. But go back to 71 and in October, where his first performances, wow, what an eye opener. I mean, what he added to the band's sound just with the piano alone, but he could do a lot of different things. He could do rock and roll. We learned later that he could take them in this big jazz direction. And he was, I think, one of the reasons why Dark Star really moved into a very jazz oriented way in 73 and 74. His influence in some of those jams on Dark Star, he led those things, through his piano playing. He was right there. If this was a dog race, he's right there with Garcia in these Dark Star jams, going as hard and fast and improvising right alongside Jerry. And he was quite a player, particularly those first few years, and made a great contribution to the band.
Yeah, here's a great example. This is from the entry from the Chicago show. Dark Star bats fourth in set two, and it's Keith who steers it into an atonal lane with his rising series of chromatic notes. They wander far and wide. Wander far and wide, a caravan through the cosmos until Garcia picks up the main theme again. After verse one, it's starry skies of slow twinkling notes until they catch a comet. Just like I said, the way they played off of each other, weaving in and out of these songs. Yeah, you say he's a highlight reel, Keith Gotcha on this one.
You know,
Feeling groovy.
it sounds fresh. I remember going back to those concerts when his first performance, his second, his third, and it's a real ear opener, to hear him on anything. Just suddenly you're hearing this bright piano song and he has these licks. He can deliver Chuck Berry stuff, Barrel House, Boogie Woogie. He could do all of these things.
Yeah, he breaks into feeling groovy like licks during, I think, Dark Star.
He was a great
Yeah.
a great piano player. He didn't, of course, sing much, right? Pigpen was a front man. He was in front of the mic and making people go crazy and telling stories and things like that. Keith's big contribution was instrumentally, and in these early years, it was just such a beautiful, I mean, Europe 72, that piano sound, signature, and that's him. You got grand piano on the stage. Not a lot of bands do that, by the way. Park a huge piano on the stage, and Yeah, he was wonderful.
Well, how often do you get a classical moment in a Dead show? There is one in the book. This is from October 29th, 1977 at Northern Illinois University at the Chick Evans Field House. And you write in St. Stephen, amidst the jam, Garcia touches on the Beethoven-esque theme that will become a masterpiece. You also cite a show on January 22nd, 1978. I think he did the same thing. What was that theme?
So first, this show you're talking about, DeKalb, everybody's got to listen to it. It's fantastic. Another one of these great performances. And it's not just me, it's kind of relatively widely recognized. Not as much as, say, the spring 77 concerts, right? Everybody's pretty conversant with Cornell and some of that. But the fall of 77 was fantastic. And this is one of those that sticks out, this October 29th. So, St. Stephen, the same show where he did Close Encounters, right? This is what comes out of Close Encounters, St. Stephen. And he hits kind of two Close Encounters kind of quavering notes. And then here comes St. Stephen right out of that, which also drove the crowd crazy.
Wow.
And but it's in the jam of St. Stephen where at Eugene, January 22, 78, he hits on this theme that, yes, sounds like Beethoven. It is, if you listen to it, you got to be careful because it'll be in your head for days on end, I swear to God. But if you go back into the fall, you can hear him trying, he comes up with the initial idea around DeKalb. There's a couple St. Stephen's in the fall of 77 where he's doing a similar theme, but he doesn't nail it. But in January 22, 78, every note is perfect. I don't know how, I don't know why. It's almost like he wrote it out and then came out on stage and just played it. But yeah, you hear him working on it. This happened also with the Allman Brothers and Elizabeth Reed. Everybody knows the Fillmore East version of that tune, and it's note perfect, right?
Right.
Although it was recorded live. If you listen to the Allman Brothers before those dates, you can hear a lot of the same elements in Duane Allman's solo, for example. But those recorded dates, how did it happen? He nailed it. Every
Mm,
note perfectly in place. Now, maybe they know it's being recorded, the Allman Brothers,
right.
right? And they can just concentrate and focus and get lucky and get it. But at Eugene in January of 78, I have no idea how Garcia suddenly had clarity on this theme and really rendered it, I'm sure, in the way he always wanted, but he really nailed it and it's perfect. And that's one of those things you must listen to.
That you got me
Absolutely.
now. I want to listen to that. January 22nd, 1978, right? You said January 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can hear both the Close Encounters and the best version of that, as well as this incredible St. Stephen theme that he played. Now, the hard part is he does the theme and he realizes, crap, I have to go back into the song now. And it's hard to pull out of this, right?
Yeah, it's
And
like, did I just go down a dead end street? How do I get back on track?
yes, you can hear this. And it's like, oh my God, I'm just going to hit the brakes. And then they play this few notes that signal they're back in the tune and it's time to sing the next verse. But I am sure at that moment, he wished the song had been written differently to give him a better way to get out of this Beethoven theme and, nicely segue. But it's like, crap, we have to go back to the song.
But how interesting to now listen to that moment. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we'll finish with a Halloween show, Radio City Music Hall in New York City, October 31st, 1980, last of an 8 show run. Talk about the opening acoustic set. You say it's the most compelling start to an acoustic set that fall. So again, here we are. There's really no rhyme or reason. It just happens to be that last of the 8 show run.
I think, and I don't know if it was the first song in the acoustic set, but they did a couple tunes that were new and different. So in the series of acoustic concerts, a couple things were going on. First, they would take an electric tune and turn it into an acoustic tune. They did this with Birdsong. They hadn't played it for a long time, but I think they started the whole acoustic run at the Warfield doing Birdsong acoustic. That was one thing they did. Second thing they did was they revived this bag of acoustic tunes they did a lot in 1970. Monkey and the Engineer, Dark Hollow, I've Been All Around This World. And then the third thing they would do was something brand new that they had never done before. So this concert, Sage and Spirit, which is this little instrumental thing from Blues for Allah, and that they played this on this Halloween night at Radio City. Another acoustic song they did was Little Sadie, which was one of these from 1970 that they revived. But this was it. I mean, they hadn't done it at the Warfield in San Francisco. They didn't do it at Radio City until this night. And suddenly you've got Little Sadie. And so those were the two things where I thought, wow, that's really special. And if you're going to pick out one of the Radio City performances, this is one that I would gravitate towards.
You say Dead Bass respondents have consistently ranked this concert the best of the year by a wide margin. There's another, you mentioned Sage and Spirit and Little Sadie, also Heaven Help the Fool. Those three, you say they would not play these three songs again, like again, period, ever?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Heaven Help the Fool, of course, was from Weir's second solo album, which I think was 1978, if I remember correctly. And why they decided to not only do this song for the first time as a band, and sometimes they would, of course, do this, right? Pull a solo song and put it into the Grateful Dead repertoire. Why Heaven Help the Fool? Why do it acoustic? Why now? I don't know, but it was a standout. It was pretty special, and it's a nice song. It's there were a number of good tunes on that record, and Easy to Slip, a little George song. I'm
I
sure you
love
know.
that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
That cover that Weird does is great.
Yeah, so that it was a nice record, and but yeah, they would never do Heaven Help the Fool again, and of course they didn't play acoustic again, really. So no Little Sadie and Sage and Spirit. I don't know, it was a little tiny thing, and no.
Infinite Dead, A Daily Guide to Grateful Dead Concert Performances, Volume 1, October. It's available through Amazon. This came out in 2021.
Yeah,
Okay.
I went on my own hiatus.
You went on your own hiatus and then you came out with the July book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could get it wherever you get your favorite rock and roll books. Now, you mentioned you are working on a book right now. Is that kind of zip the lip on that one, or can you give us a little?
I wrote several of these books, just haven't published them yet because publishing is my least favorite thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of proofreading and editing and all the back and forth and the deadlines. I just don't like it much. And so I need time off, right?
Yeah.
To forget about what it is. And then, oh, let's do another one.
Recharge the batteries.
Exactly. So I am thinking about maybe doing December for the next one. First, it gives me some time. The publisher needs 6 months lead time, so I wouldn't have to submit a manuscript until June or July of next year. So that was a big part of it. Maybe I could find a way to do December. It's a weird month. It's lopsided because all the performances, the majority of them are in the last 5 days of the month because
New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve. Yeah, they did like 20 of those on one day, the 31st.
Wow.
And a lot on the 30th and the 28th and the 27th. But I was thinking about that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
In the meantime, you got these two.
Yes.
And there's plenty to read in each of these. And we've only really just covered, I don't know, like a tenth of what's in these books. So check out these books, get them, and go back and listen to these concerts after you read the book, because it's a whole new perspective on it. Or maybe you're revisiting a show that you just thought, nah, I'm not really, I heard that once, don't want to hear it again. Give it another listen now, because things could change over time. There's so many albums and songs that I've listened to like 10 years, 20 years later that I didn't like then and I love now. So it could be the same experience with a Dead show. where can people find you online? There's the website that goes along with the books, right? Infinite Dead website.
Yeah, I think it's infinitedead.net, N-E-T. And so if you buy the ebook, there's a link in there, a hyperlink that says link to recordings. And if you click it, you're taken to the infinitedead.net blog, and you'll find recordings that you can click, and it opens up on archive.org. So if you read something in the ebook and you want to listen along, you can do that by clicking the links. And that's primarily what that website is, just a collection of these links, which I annotate to explain the different qualities among some of these recordings. It's a curated list of recordings. It's not all of them. Some concerts, there's 20 different recordings, and I'll pick out 3 to put onto the blog that I think are the ones that you want to start with. And you could pick out one and just listen to it. And yeah, if it's been a while for somebody, new recordings are created all the time, including these matrix recordings. So if you thought this is no good, it's just a scratchy audience recording, a soundboard may have surfaced and a matrix may have surfaced. So it's definitely worth revisiting if you can.
Yeah, it is infinitedead.net. I'm looking at it here. And also, people can reach you through the website. So I'm sure you've had some interesting conversations with fellow Dead fans over the.
Some, not enough. I
Yeah,
love talking to people about this. A couple people did write in after the first book and say, when's the next one? And I reached out to them in late June to tell them, hey, July is coming. And they were thrilled, right? It's like, this is
sure.
great. And they went and they bought it. And one of them contributed a review on Amazon. You know, if you buy the book through Amazon, you have the right to contribute a review if you want. And so I do have a small rabid reader base, but I have not done really any marketing of the book, not really, and that's okay. But I would love to hear from anybody who would like to talk about the music, or just let me know you've read it. If you don't like it, I want to hear that too.
And
All feedback is welcome.
yeah, and you're welcome back here in the month of December. So not this December, but maybe December of
Next
2025.
next year.
Well, I got to keep the podcast going at least till then, just so I can have
I,
you back on. Yeah,
I
man. Thanks, David. This was awesome. I'm glad that we were able to cover the first of the 2 volumes, and people should check out the books and reach out to David online, infinitedead.net. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Much appreciated.